This lesson is an introduction to the 10 Commandments. Our pastor has taught us, when we want to understand a Bible passage, to ask the background questions, like what, when, where, why, or who. So let's start with the when. When did God give the 10 Commandments? We'll start the story back in the time of Abraham, when God promised that he would create a great nation from Abraham's descendants. The peak of that nation comes in the time of Solomon, but Abraham had no idea that it would take over 1,000 years to fulfill that promise. After 500 years, Abraham's family is big, but they are not a great nation. They are slaves in Egypt. That's when God comes, works great miracles, and sets them free. That was the Exodus. He brings them to Mount Sinai, where he gives them the law. So the 10 Commandments are halfway between Abraham and Solomon. They are the next big step in God's plan for his people. And they don't come for 500 years. Sometimes the plans of God seem slow to us, too. Many of us are stuck at home right now, not knowing how long this trouble will last. But Peter tells us that the Lord is not slow. Sometimes it seems slow to us, but God has a perfect plan. Now, where were the 10 Commandments given? Well, here's a map of the Mediterranean Sea, and over here on the east is the land of Israel, and here's the Sinai Peninsula, and over here is Egypt, where the people are slaves. And they are headed over here to the Promised Land, where God is going to take them. But he is not going to take them straight there. Instead, he is going to take them on a big detour, down here into the middle of the desert. Here is Mount Sinai. This is a big detour. Sometimes God takes us on detours too. We want to go to some promised land, but God leads us instead to a difficult desert place. Look at this photo of Mount Sinai. There are no trees, there's no grass, there's no water. It is a dry, rocky desert. Why did God bring them here? It's no wonder sometimes they complained. But God tells us the reason in Exodus 13. He was afraid that the people would change their minds and go back to Egypt. They were not ready for the battles that would come when they got to the Promised Land. So it was better for them to take this detour. Does it seem like your life is in a detour right now? God knows that we need these detours. They are for our good. Now, who? This question has 3 answers. First, of course, is God. He gave the 10 Commandments. Did you know that God has a name? Moses asked, "What is your name?" And God told him. What is God's name? This is tricky because God has a Hebrew name. Some people say Yahweh. Some people say Jehovah. Which is right? Does it bother you that we don't know how to say God's name? It should not bother you because it is a Hebrew name. It is not Yahweh or Jehovah. It is this. You and I don't speak Hebrew. Foreign names are often hard for us to say. Here's an example. Our church has a missionary who does Bible translation work. Here is her picture. Do you know her name? Well, here is her name. Can you read that? Probably not, because it is written in Korean. She is from Korea. So you say, please write it for me in English letters. Well, we can't, because Korean has sounds that are different from English. Some of the sounds in her name have no matching letter in English. We can try, but it will not be exactly right. Here is how she writes it in English. Someone else might write this. Unfortunately, neither one of those is exactly right. Her name is not Hairi. Her name is not Haley. Her name is something like Hyeri. But it's Korean, and there's no way to say it perfectly in English. I think it's that way with God's name. God has a Hebrew name, and we don't know Hebrew. So Yahweh is one way to say it in English. Jehovah is another way. So that's who is speaking. God is speaking, the God named Yahweh. But the message is coming through a human messenger, through the man Moses. In the Bible, God sends his messages in many different ways. Sometimes he talks directly to people. Sometimes he sends an angel. Once he used an animal. Once he wrote on the wall. But usually he uses people. In this case, he used the man named Moses. God can do anything any way he wants, but he usually uses people. And God has some job for you, too. It will not be Moses' job, but it will be something. Why don't you ask God today, God, what do you want me to do for you today? Maybe he wants you to help someone, or encourage someone, or send a letter to someone. Could be lots of different things, but I know that when God has a job to do, he often asks for a person to help him do it. So the message comes from God through Moses, and it goes to the children of Israel. But there is another name here in Exodus 19:3. God says, "Thus shall you say to the house of Jacob, and tell the sons of Israel." Well, who is that? Is that somebody different? No, because God changed Jacob's name to Israel. Those are two different names for the same man. He was the father of 12 sons, who became the 12 tribes of Israel. And who else are the commandments for? Well, they are for you and me, too. God did not put you in one of the 12 tribes, but he did put you in a family. Who are you the son of? What family did God choose for you? Because these commandments are for you, too. That's why they're written in the Bible. That's why we're studying them. So we talked about the who. Now, why did God give the law? Well, God gave his people 3 different kinds of commandments. First is the part that we call the civil law. This is how the government should behave. This part of the law is important if you are a judge or a policeman. Second is the ceremonial law. What you should eat, what you should wear, what you should do in the temple. This part of the law is important if you are a Jew, but the New Testament makes it clear not all of that law is for us. But the 10 Commandments are something else. The 10 Commandments are the moral law of God. They say what is right and wrong for everybody, all the time. Nobody should steal, ever. It's wrong. The 10 Commandments teach us about right and wrong. But there is more. The 10 Commandments also teach us about God. There is only one God, so you should not worship idols. God is truth, so you should not tell a lie. God created life, so you should not kill. When we study God's commandments, we learn more about what God is like. The 10 Commandments also teach us about ourselves. Why do we want to lie? Why do we so easily covet other people's things? When we think about the 10 Commandments, we discover that there is a sinful nature inside of us that does not want to obey. The 10 Commandments show us that we are sinners. And finally, the law teaches us about Jesus Christ. This is true of all 3 parts of the law. The civil law is for government, And someday Jesus will come and set up a perfect government on the earth. He will be the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. The ceremonial law taught the Jews to sacrifice lambs, and Jesus is the Lamb of God, sacrificed for us. The Old Testament ceremonial law was a grand picture of the coming sacrifice. And finally, the moral law teaches us about sin, and Jesus was the sinless Son of God. As you think about the Ten Commandments, you should think about God. You should think about yourself. And you should especially think about Jesus. Jesus, who said he didn't come to destroy the law, he came to fulfill it.